They called themselves the fiercest warriors of ancient Greece, a people forged in discipline, loyalty, and absolute control. But behind the shining legend of Spartan courage on the battlefield lay a far darker truth. Punishments so cruel, so twisted, that even their fellow Greeks watched in horror. Imagine being thrown into a bottomless pit, whipped until your skin was torn apart, or executed. Not for any crime, but for the crime of being weak. These weren't the acts of their enemies. This was Spartan justice. Today, we uncover the most brutal and bizarre execution methods of Sparta, and what we find may shatter everything you thought you knew about these warrior people. The Spartans are often remembered for their heroics at Thermopylae, standing shoulder to shoulder against the vast Persian army. But their obsession with strength came at a terrible cost. Sparta wasn't like Athens or Thebes, where philosophy, art, and debate thrived. It was more like a military camp disguised as a city. Every law, every custom, every punishment existed for one purpose: to keep the state strong and the people in line. That meant weakness was never tolerated, not in battle, not in spirit, and not even at birth. One of the most chilling Spartan traditions began before a child could even speak. Newborns were inspected by the elders of the tribe. If a baby appeared frail, deformed, or simply unfit for the brutal life ahead, it was said they were taken to Mount Taygetus and left to die in a chasm known as the Apothete. Some historians still debate whether Spartan infants were truly thrown from the cliffs or simply abandoned to the cold. But the outcome was the same. Survival was never a right, only a privilege reserved for the strong. This wasn't execution in the legal sense, but it defined Sparta's grim philosophy. Death was the ultimate price for failing the ideal. And when it came to adults, the cruelty didn't end. It only evolved. Take the Helots, the enslaved class forced to farm the land while Spartan warriors trained for war. The Helots outnumbered the Spartans many times over, a fact that made them both essential and dangerous. To keep them in fear, the Spartans created a ritual known as the Krypteia. Young Spartan men, teenagers still in training, were sent out at night armed only with daggers. But this was no exercise, no test of stealth or skill. Their mission was murder. They were encouraged, even commanded, to kill any helot they found in the darkness, especially those who appeared strong, defiant, or proud. It was a state-sanctioned purge, a form of social execution disguised as training. Imagine living every day knowing that a masked youth could step from the shadows and kill you, not for a crime, but simply for who you were. But not all Spartan executions were hidden in the dark. Some were performed in daylight, public spectacles meant to terrify. One of the most bizarre and brutal punishments was death by flogging. Every year, during the festival of Artemis Orthia, Spartan youths were whipped in a ritual meant to test endurance. But this test often crossed into torture. Boys were beaten until their flesh split open, and some died on the altar, their deaths treated almost as offerings to the goddess. Now imagine if flogging was part of a religious ceremony. What would it be like as an actual punishment? Records suggest that criminals could be whipped to death, their agony serving as a living warning to anyone who dared defy Spartan law. Then there was execution by the chasm, the same fate once given to unwanted infants. Traitors, cowards, and criminals who betrayed the state were said to be thrown from the cliffs near Mount Taygetus, their bodies shattered on the rocks below. It sounds almost ritualistic, as if being cast from the city physically symbolized being cast from society itself. And in Sparta, there was no worse fate than being branded a coward or a traitor. Even exile was a kind of death sentence. A Spartan stripped of citizenship, known as an atimos, was cut off from the community, forbidden from joining communal meals, assemblies, or military service. To a people who lived and died for the collective, this was social execution. Many didn't survive long. Others suffered humiliations so severe they preferred death to disgrace. Cowards in battle were forced to wear cloaks of mismatched colors, shave half their beards, and yield the road to everyone they met. In a world where honor was life itself, this was living death. Some chose suicide rather than endure the daily shame. But perhaps the strangest punishments were those reserved for Sparta's kings. For all their power, they were never above the law. If a king failed his duty, especially in war, he could be fined, exiled, or even executed. One of the most haunting examples was King Pausanias. Accused of plotting with the Persians, he fled to a temple seeking sanctuary. But the Spartans bricked up the entrance, trapping him inside. He starved to death within the sacred walls, dying at the threshold of the gods. It was a chilling mix of execution, torture, and religious symbolism, a message to every Spartan. Not even kings could defy the state. Here's where the twist comes in. To us, these punishments look like barbaric cruelty. But to the Spartans, it was never simply cruelty. It was control. Their entire world balanced on a knife's edge, a small ruling elite, surrounded by enemies abroad and restless helots at home. Brutality wasn't chaos, it was strategy. By turning execution into spectacle, by making humiliation worse than death, by training young men to kill before they could even grow beards, Sparta ensured total obedience. Fear wasn't a consequence of punishment, it was the purpose. And yet, that obsession came with a price. The same harshness that made Sparta strong also made it fragile. When their numbers dwindled after endless wars, their rigid system couldn't bend, and so it broke. Sparta didn't fall to invasion, but to its own inflexibility. So what can we take from this? Sparta's strange and savage punishments weren't about justice, at least not in any sense we recognize today. They were about enforcing an ideal, no matter the human cost. The weak, the rebellious, the dishonored, all could be erased by dagger in the night, by flogging in the square, or by a long fall into the chasm below. But their story also carries a warning, one that echoes beyond ancient Greece. When a society demands perfection, it risks becoming its own prison. And when fear becomes the foundation of order, the line between justice and cruelty disappears.